Hi, welcome to the Green Room. I am Aaron, and I would love to tell you just a little bit about what this podcast is, who we're going to be talking to, why we're going to be talking to them, and I would also like to talk about who I am and some of the experiences that I've had that led me to want to start this podcast and why I'm talking to the people that I'm talking to. So let's get into it. Like I said, my name is Aaron. I am married with a little daughter. We live in the Atlanta area. I work at Hamilton Mill Church in Hamilton Mill, Georgia. It's about 45 minutes north of Atlanta. It's part of the North Point Ministry network of churches. And I've been working in the church world now for about 9 years. Uh, about 7 of that has been with North Point Ministries, and 2-ish years of that has been in other small little churches in the area. That's where I was able to get my feet wet and get my start into the church world. The time that I was working in the church world before I was on staff at North Point Ministries, I was volunteering at Gwinnett Church when they were in their temporary location. And so I got to meet the guys over there and got to get a little taste of that sort of type of production. And I really enjoyed doing that. And when the opportunity came to interview for a position at North Point Ministries, I took it, and I've loved every minute since. And now I get the opportunity to lead the production team over at Hamilton Mill Church, and I've been doing that for about a month now, which has been great. Lots of learning, lots of learning. I'm sure that'll be coming up and stuff like that. But it's great. It's a lot of fun, and so next, why do I want to start this podcast? Why start a podcast about production or church production specifically when there's resources galore? There's the MXU podcast, there's the Church Gear podcast, there's this podcast, there's that podcast, there's this TikTok account, that TikTok account. You name it, there's probably something out there for it, people talking about it. But one thing that I have not really seen people talking much about is beyond the gear. Why are we doing what we're doing? Those other podcasts are fantastic podcasts, MXU, Philo podcast. Those are great resources. I'm not saying that you should not listen to those. You should listen to everything you can. What I want to focus on is the why behind the gear. Why do we do what we do? Why should we hold ourselves to such high standards for what we do? Why is it important for things to be checked and rechecked? Why is it important that we are really students of the gear? But we're not going to be talking about the gear. This podcast is really not going to be talking about the ins and outs of this console or that console or this lighting fixture versus this lighting fixture. I'm sure those things will come up, and in conversations with people, we'll talk about some things because production guys, we like to nerd out. But the real focus is finding out who is doing these things, why they're doing these things, and why we should hold ourselves to a higher standard in production because of who we're doing it for. And I would love to go into more detail on that in another podcast, another solo podcast. But that, like I said, is another podcast. This podcast series, I really want to talk to the people that are actually in the building every Sunday morning, whether that's volunteer, whether that's a contractor, whether that's a staff member on the programming team or the lighting director on the production team. I want to talk to everybody involved in the Sunday morning service, adult service. Well, actually, you know what? Not even really adult service, just production. I mean, there's no reason that we shouldn't talk to the student environment production guys, they have a completely different experience and different perspective than people in the adult service, stuff like that. Um, just one thing of note at the beginning of this podcast series, I will be talking to a lot of people in and revolving around the North Point Ministries network of churches and stuff like that. Just those are the people that I know. One, two, those are the people that said yes to coming on my podcast. Um, and three, I mean, I've been working with them for 7 years now, so we have that relationship that I can go ask them um, and ask them to be on the podcast. So, but this is not a North Point podcast. It's not sponsored by North Point. It's not sponsored by anybody yet. But I just wanted to put that out there in case you're like, oh, what's this? What's that? Some of the North Point speak and stuff like that. Please, if you have any questions about stuff that we talk about, leave a comment or um, uh, leave a comment on the podcast or Instagram and stuff like that. And I'd be happy to answer any of those things if we get to, jargony. But hopefully that's not the case. But I just wanted to put that out there. The goal is to talk to anybody involved. That church, this church, it's not church specific. It's Big C Church. I want to talk to everybody. The last thing that I want to sort of set up is sort of the style of the podcast. I really would like this podcast to be a conversation with the people, the other person, or maybe the other people on the other side of the screen. I don't sit down with a list of questions that I want to ask them. Obviously, I know their background and I know sort of the general direction that the podcast may take, whether they're a lighting designer or whether they're a worship leader, that kind of thing. But it's not a formulaic podcast. That's why some of the podcasts may be over an hour long, and some of the podcasts may be 25 minutes. It's just we're having a conversation. And one of the reasons that I named it the green room is I wanted to have that feeling of you're in the green room and you're just sitting down and talking to a friend, or you're talking to someone that's new to the green room and you're like, hey, thanks for joining us. Tell me about yourself, that kind of stuff. Just like you would do in the green room on a Sunday morning between services or before services, that kind of thing. So that is why I named it the green room. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to having more conversations. I've already recorded a few, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to talking more about just church production in general. So I hope that that's some clarification, and I hope you'll join me in the green room.